When people hear the word limitless, they often imagine a life where they can do anything, go anywhere, and achieve everything they desire. It's a vision of endless opportunities, power, and freedom. But this idea is rooted in a subtle misunderstanding. It assumes that being limitless is about accumulating more experiences, more success, more control. It paints a picture of a life where obstacles vanish and the world bends to your will. This interpretation, however, is still tied to the notion of limits. It frames life as a series of barriers to overcome and suggests that freedom lies on the other side of those barriers. It implies that until you've gained enough or achieved enough, you're somehow incomplete, as though your value and potential are tied to external circumstances. In reality, the idea of being limitless isn't about escaping limitations or endlessly expanding your reach. It's about realizing that the constraints we perceive are often self-imposed or illusory. Limitlessness doesn't require you to break free because you were never truly confined. It's not about becoming something more, but about seeing through the mistaken belief that you were ever less. True freedom isn't about the ability to do anything you want, go anywhere you please, or control every aspect of your life. These are external freedoms, and while they may bring convenience or a sense of empowerment, they are not the essence of what it means to be truly free. External freedoms can be limited by circumstances, laws, or the unpredictability of life itself. But true freedom goes beyond these surface-level conditions. It begins within. It's the freedom to let go of the need for constant control, the endless striving to mold the world to fit your desires. It's the freedom to accept things as they are without feeling bound by frustration or resistance. This inner freedom arises when you stop identifying with the stories you tell yourself, the narratives of success, failure, approval, or rejection that often dictate how you feel about your life. When you're free inside, you realize that nothing external can truly imprison you. Challenges, obstacles, and even suffering lose their grip because your sense of self is no longer tied to them. You're no longer a prisoner of fear, doubt, or the opinions of others. Instead, you experience life with an open mind and an open heart, responding rather than reacting, flowing rather than forcing. This kind of freedom isn't dependent on what you have or achieve. It's the simple yet profound recognition that you are complete as you are, and nothing external can take that away. It's the realization that no matter what happens, your inner peace and joy remain untouched, like the calm depths of the ocean beneath the surface waves. True freedom is the unshakable understanding that you are not bound by anything outside yourself, because the real source of freedom has always been within. The sense of being separate, of existing as an isolated self within a vast and indifferent universe, is one of the most pervasive illusions in human experience. From an early age, we're taught to think of ourselves as distinct entities neatly divided from the world around us. We learn to say, "This is me," pointing to our bodies, our thoughts, or our possessions, and that is not me, referring to everything else. But have you ever stopped to question where this boundary really lies? Look closely, and you'll find that the line between you and the world is far less clear than it seems. Take your breath, for example. With every inhale, the air outside becomes part of you. And with every exhale, you become part of the atmosphere. Your body, which you think of as you, is composed of elements that were once the soil, the rain, and the sunlight, constantly cycling through the ecosystem. Even your thoughts and emotions, which feel so private, are shaped by your interactions with people, culture, and experiences. This illusion of separation is reinforced by language and perception. We say, "I see the tree," as though there's a gap between the observer and the observed, but isn't it the case that your eyes, your brain, and your awareness are all part of the process of seeing? The tree, in a sense, is not out there, it's inseparable from your perception of it. The act of observing connects you to the world in a way that makes the distinction between you and it fade away. Believing in separation creates a world of opposites, self and other, subject and object, us and them. It leads to feelings of alienation, fear, and competition, as though we are all tiny islands adrift in a vast ocean. But when you begin to see through this illusion, you realize that there are no islands, only the ocean itself. You are not a separate fragment of existence. You are part of a boundless, interconnected whole. This recognition doesn't erase your individuality, but enriches it. You are both the wave and the ocean, unique in form, yet inseparable from the greater flow of life. The illusion of separation dissolves not by rejecting individuality, but by understanding that individuality itself arises from and depends upon the unity of all things. The world is far more interconnected than we often realize. At first glance, it might seem as though we are self-contained beings, each operating independently within a complex but separate environment. We think of ourselves as individuals with clear boundaries, our skin marking where we end and the rest of the world begins. But when you look deeper, this sense of separation begins to dissolve, and the profound interconnection of everything comes into focus. Consider the simple act of breathing. With every inhale, the air that was moments ago part of the atmosphere becomes part of you, sustaining your life. With every exhale, you release carbon dioxide, which plants take in to grow. This exchange reveals that your life is intimately tied to the life of the world around you. You are not just in the environment, you are part of it, constantly participating in its rhythms. The food you eat, the water you drink, the sunlight that warms your skin, all of these come from the earth, and all of them become you. The cells in your body are built from the elements of the soil, nourished by rain and transformed by the energy of the sun. Even the atoms that make up your body were forged in ancient stars, connecting you to the cosmos in the most literal sense. You are quite literally made of stardust. This interconnection extends beyond the physical. The thoughts you think and the emotions you feel are shaped by your relationships, your culture, and the experiences you share with others. Every conversation, every interaction ripples outward, influencing the world in ways you may never fully comprehend. And in turn, you are constantly influenced by the people, events, and environments around you. Recognizing this interconnection transforms how we see ourselves and the world. It shows that no action is truly isolated, that everything we do reverberates through the web of existence. It invites us to move beyond the narrow confines of self-interest and to see our lives as part of a larger whole. Far from diminishing our individuality, this awareness deepens it. Just as a single wave is both distinct and inseparable from the ocean, each of us is a unique expression of a shared, interconnected reality. To embrace this truth is to live with greater compassion, curiosity, and a sense of belonging, knowing that we are never truly alone, but always part of something greater. People often cling to limits as though they are lifelines, believing that these boundaries provide security and a clear sense of self. Limits give structure to our lives. They define what we can and cannot do, who we are, and where we belong. While this may feel safe, it can also become a source of confinement, creating a narrow view of what is possible. Yet, paradoxically, we rarely question the limits we hold on to, even as we dream of breaking free from them. These limits take many forms. Some are physical or external, like the constraints of time, resources, or social circumstances. Others are internal beliefs about what we're capable of, fears of failure, or ideas of who we should be. We impose these limits on ourselves, telling stories about what is or isn't realistic, what is or isn't acceptable, and we hold on to them as though they define our very existence. Part of the reason we become attached to limits is because they provide a sense of identity. If you think about it, much of who we believe ourselves to be is shaped by what we consider our boundaries. We say, "I'm not good at that," or "I could never do this," and these statements, repeated over time, become a framework for how we navigate life. Letting go of those boundaries can feel disorienting, like losing a map. But what if the map itself is incomplete? What if the limits we've attached ourselves to are only constructs, useful at times, perhaps, but ultimately imaginary? We live in a world that constantly changes, a world where growth and transformation are as natural as the changing seasons. The limits we cling to are often relics of the past, assumptions that no longer serve us but linger because we've grown accustomed to their presence. This attachment to limits creates tension, a tug of war between our desire for freedom and our fear of the unknown. We yearn to expand, to explore, to discover the fullness of what we can be, yet we hesitate to step beyond the familiar lines we've drawn around ourselves. It's as if we're standing at the edge of a vast open field, holding tightly to a fence that no longer needs to be there. When we start to question these limits, we begin to see them for what they are: not fixed barriers, but flexible points of reference. They are not walls that confine us, but markers that can guide us if we let them. And as we loosen our grip on the need for certainty, we find that stepping beyond our perceived limits doesn't diminish who we are. Instead, it reveals the vastness of what we've always been. To release attachment to limits is not to lose our identity, but to allow it to grow and evolve. It is to recognize that the only true boundary is the one we place on our imagination, and that life, in all its complexity, offers infinite possibilities to those who are willing to see beyond the lines they've drawn. Many people go through life feeling as though they are trapped in a cage, limited by circumstances, expectations, or their own fears. This sense of confinement can be deeply unsettling, leading us to believe that freedom lies somewhere out there, beyond our reach. We imagine that if we could just break free, achieve a certain goal, overcome a particular obstacle, or escape a specific situation, we would finally experience the liberation we crave. But this perception of being trapped is an illusion. The cage we think surrounds us is not made of unbreakable bars or impenetrable walls. It is made of thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions. It exists only because we believe it does. We look around and see barriers where there are none, telling ourselves stories about why we can't or shouldn't step beyond them. Consider how much of what holds us back is rooted in fear: fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of change. These fears shape the boundaries of our so-called cage, convincing us that stepping outside of it is too risky or too painful. But fear, when examined closely, is often a shadow of our own making, fed by the mind's habit of projecting worst-case scenarios. The cage, then, is not an external reality, but an internal construct. Even the rules and expectations imposed by society, which can feel so restrictive, are often less rigid than we think. Many of these rules are agreements we've unconsciously made, assumptions we've absorbed without question. When we begin to challenge them, we find that much of what we thought was fixed is actually flexible, and much of what we thought was mandatory is optional. The illusion of the cage persists because it gives us a sense of structure, even if that structure feels confining. It tells us where we belong, what is expected of us, and what the limits of our world are. Letting go of this illusion can feel destabilizing, as though we are stepping into the unknown without a safety net. But what we discover when we finally take that step is that the cage was never locked. It was never even real. True freedom comes from recognizing that the cage is a product of the mind. It dissolves when we stop believing in its reality. The walls we imagine around us are as fragile as mist, vanishing the moment we see through them. And when we do, we realize that life was never about escaping the cage. It was about understanding that we were free all along. This realization doesn't mean life becomes effortless or that challenges disappear. What it does mean is that we approach those challenges with the understanding that we are not confined by them. The cage was never meant to hold us. It was only a reflection of our own doubts and fears. Once we see it for what it is, we are free to move beyond it, to explore the limitless possibilities that were always waiting for us. We live in a world obsessed with definitions. We label ourselves, others, and the world around us constantly, creating boxes and categories that give us a sense of order and clarity. We define who we are by our jobs, our relationships, our successes, our failures, each label serving as a marker of where we fit into the larger picture. But these definitions, while useful in some ways, are also limiting. They carve out narrow spaces for us to inhabit, and over time we begin to believe that we are confined to these labels. When we say, "I am this," or "I am that," we create a boundary around our true nature. We think this is me, and everything else is not me, as though our essence could be captured in a single word or a series of descriptors. Yet in doing so, we forget that life and the self is not static. It is fluid, dynamic, and ever evolving. A definition is merely a snapshot of a moment in time, a frozen image of something far more complex and expansive. To let go of these definitions is not to lose a sense of self, but rather to free ourselves from the narrow confines that we've placed around who we think we are. It's to stop identifying with labels and instead embrace the fullness of our being. When we let go of these fixed ideas, we open ourselves to the possibility of becoming something more, something we cannot yet see or predict. This process involves challenging the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are capable of. These stories are often based on past experiences, fears, or societal expectations. We say, "I am not good enough," or "I can't do that," because somewhere along the way we accepted those ideas as truth. But when we begin to question these definitions, we realize they are not truths at all. They are simply stories, narratives that we've internalized and come to believe. The freedom that comes from letting go of definitions is the freedom to live authentically, without the weight of expectations or self-imposed limits. Without these labels, we are free to explore and express ourselves in a more genuine way. We no longer have to live up to a set image of who we think we should be, but instead can live as the fluid, ever-changing beings we are. The same applies to how we view the world and others. When we define people by their roles, their past mistakes, or their appearances, we reduce them to something smaller than they truly are. We fail to see them in their fullness, as dynamic beings capable of growth and transformation. By letting go of these definitions, we open ourselves to the richness and complexity of life itself. Ultimately, to let go of definitions is to live with greater freedom and openness, to embrace the unknown and the unknowable. It's to accept that the self is not a fixed entity, but an unfolding process, a living expression of the universe itself. It is a shift from seeing life as a set of static categories to experiencing it as a dynamic, evolving flow, where the boundaries between this and that are ever-changing, and where we are free to become who we truly are. At the core of our experience, there is a profound truth: we are not separate from the universe. The idea that we are isolated, independent beings in an expansive world is a deeply ingrained illusion, one that shapes how we see ourselves and interact with everything around us. From a young age, we are taught to think of ourselves as distinct individuals, each with our own identity, desires, and needs. We develop a sense of self that feels solid and separate from the world, but in truth, this separateness is merely a concept and idea created by the mind. In reality, we are an expression of the universe, inseparable from the vast web of life that stretches from the farthest reaches of space to the smallest atom. Every breath we take is a direct connection to the earth and the air, the sun, and the stars. The very molecules in our bodies were formed in the heart of distant stars, and they continue to cycle through the planet in an unbroken flow of energy and matter. We are not just part of the universe, we are the universe itself, expressing its infinite potential in human form. This realization changes everything. When we recognize our unity with the universe, we understand that we are not bound by the limitations we once believed were our own. Our sense of individuality, though important and unique, is but one temporary manifestation of the greater, all-encompassing life force. We are not passengers on a ship that is sailing through the cosmos. We are the ship itself, built from the same energy, moving in the same currents, and part of the same endless journey. The idea of unity with the universe is not a lofty, abstract concept. It is a living, breathing reality that we can feel in every moment. The sunlight on your skin, the breeze that stirs the trees, the heartbeat that keeps you alive, they are not separate from you. They are expressions of the same energy that flows through your veins. The earth beneath your feet, the sky above, and the stars that light the night, they are all part of the same dance. And you are right in the middle of it. Every moment, every experience, every encounter is an opportunity to feel this interconnectedness, to recognize that you are not an observer of the world, but an active participant in its unfolding. This unity is not something that can be fully understood through the intellect, for the mind is conditioned to see division and separation. Instead, it is something to be felt, to be experienced in the depths of our being. It comes alive in the quiet moments of stillness, when we are no longer grasping at thoughts or chasing after external desires. In those moments, we can feel the pulse of the universe in our own hearts, and we realize that there is no separation between us and everything else. Living in this awareness transforms how we interact with the world. It softens our hearts and removes the sense of alienation that so often accompanies the human experience. When we know that we are not separate from others, we treat them with compassion and respect, knowing that in some way they are reflections of ourselves. We act with a deeper sense of responsibility, recognizing that our actions are woven into the fabric of existence, and that what we do to the world, we do to ourselves. When we truly feel our unity with the universe, we are no longer caught in the struggle of trying to control or manipulate life. We let go of the need to constantly chase after what we think will bring us happiness, because we understand that happiness arises naturally from our connection to the whole. Life becomes less about achievement and more about participation and ongoing flow of experience, where we are free to express our unique essence without fear or resistance, knowing that we are always part of something much greater than ourselves. In the end, the idea of being limitless is not about striving for more or seeking freedom outside ourselves. It is about realizing the profound truth that we are already free. We are not bound by the constraints of the mind, the body, or the world around us. The limits we perceive are self-imposed, illusions that obscure the vast potential within us. True freedom arises from within. When we let go of the definitions and labels we cling to, when we dissolve the illusion of separation, and when we recognize our deep interconnection with the world and the universe. We are not separate from life, we are life itself, unfolding in unique, boundless ways. When we release our attachment to limits and open ourselves to the endless possibilities of who we can be, we begin to live in harmony with the flow of existence. This is the essence of unity, understanding that we are part of an interconnected whole, not isolated beings fighting against the current, but active participants in the unfolding dance of life. To be limitless is to let go of the belief that we are confined by anything, be it our past, our fears, or the labels we've accepted. It is to recognize that we are already part of the infinite, and in that recognition we step into the fullness of who we are. Life, in all its beauty and complexity, offers us the opportunity to live fully, freely, and without limits. The cage was never real, the boundaries were never fixed. We have always been free to move beyond them.